Tariffs. I think that has been headline news for the past, call it, week or so. So what Citi has done, on the topic of tariffs, what Citi has done is gone to look at, the impact of tariffs on S&P earnings, because I think that's crucial. And what we found is, interestingly, close to about 50% of companies are actually quite relatively insulated by tariff pressures. And the reason for that is because either they're more services oriented, or maybe, less than a third of their business is around goods. And I would say the knock-on effects on S&P 500 earnings is that potentially we could look at a negative or a downside of 4 to 5% in S&P earnings if the tariffs were to be implemented. The 25% on Mexico and Canada, as well as 10%. Yeah, exactly. So if it were to be implemented, we're looking at a downside of, call it, 4 to 5%. Yeah. But that being said, another one of the Trump administration's key policies is around tax reform. Right? And if the tax reform were to come through, if it were to be implemented, then that could potentially add 4% to S&P 500 earnings. So
cancel it out.
Yeah, exactly, effectively negating it, right? Oh. So that is interesting. Of course, one thing to note is, tax reform is going to take a lot longer to implement versus tariffs, like what we've seen.
And it has to get through Congress, I think, is the point. So this is going to be a political challenge, I think, yes, in terms of the tax cuts. But back to tariffs, though, it's interesting that you note that the composition of the S&P, the companies in there, about half of them, you're saying, right, yeah, derive more of their profits from services. Not manufactured products.
Yes.
So that's an interesting offset, and probably no surprise why you're looking at an earnings hit of 4 to 5%, which is mid-range. We've heard anywhere from 2 to up to 10.
Oh, okay.
So that makes that sounds interesting. Yeah. The tax cut side, though, which would offset your 4 to 5% hit from tariffs, what are you assuming the outcome will be from the political process? Are we going to get corporate earnings down to full fat 15%, or somewhere in the middle, 16, 17, 18% from 21 now, or where do they end up?
He has campaigned that he's going to bring it down to that levels, right? But then we don't exactly expect that to happen. I think, like you mentioned, that to go to Congress is probably going to be quite difficult. Yeah. Probably the first step would be to kind of prolong what he implemented first in 2017, right? So to extend the tax cuts which are coming due. So, and then it goes to a lot of budget-related constraints as well, because if he were to extend the tax cut, that's going to add a lot to the deficit, and then he's going to need to kind of counteract that. I think that's why the tariff thing is the first thing off the bat after he became president.